Hi, I am Wendy Vandeputty. I'm a communications instructor at Brainerd High School and Central Lake College, and I'm really excited to share with you today something that I am very passionate about, and that is healthy communications. So I'm going to share a two-part series. In the first part, we will look at just why it's important to study communications, and we'll look at yourself as a communicator, how to know yourself better, and then we'll just get into some of the conflict basics. Then in part two, we will really dive in. We will talk about the dangers of avoiding conflict and the benefits of solving conflict in a healthy manner, as well as lots of useful strategies that you can take away for putting healthy practices into your own lives. So let's get started. So when you think about communications, it's interesting to know that it was first considered an art form way back in the 4th century BC by a wise man named Aristotle. Although it hasn't really been considered a discipline until many years back, and very few of us actually have formal training in communications. But you don't have to panic because it's something you use every single day, so you're not coming into this session with no knowledge whatsoever. It's just getting better at the things that you do well and then learning some things you might not be aware of regarding healthy communications. So there are a lot of reasons to study communication. First of all, 80 to 90% of our waking day is spent in some form of communication. So that is incredible. And communication experts give 3 basic reasons why we should study communications. The first is for our employability. Employers want people who have job skills on the training, demand, but they also want people who can be good communicators, who can listen, who can share their ideas in thoughtful manners, and again, who can handle conflict in peaceful, successful ways. So it's really important to prepare yourself for the job world by practicing your communication skills. The second one is actually to improve our relationships. We will all be in many relationships in our lives, whether it's with your friends, your family, your coworkers, and learning how to express ourselves in open and honest ways and again solve things in peaceful manners helps our relationships last for a lifetime, hopefully. And the third reason is actually to improve our health. I want you to think about your day-to-day interactions. Maybe at the grocery store, you're standing in a long line. How likely are you to just say hello or strike up a conversation with the person in front of you or behind you? Or how about the person who serves your coffee every day at the coffee shop? Those little tiny interactions can actually help us live longer. Research says that when we're able to communicate with people better, we have a healthier social network. We feel more safe and secure. We have a better sense of self well-being, and it just helps us to be healthier. So there are lots of reasons to study communication. So let's stop, and I want you just to reflect for a second. Think about your own life right now. Think about ways that becoming a better communicator would help you. Is it going to help you with your jobs, or your relationships, or your own well-being? Okay, we're going to transition to discuss the value of listening. This is another skill that is not often taught beyond, say, kindergarten, first grade. But do you know that almost 45% of our day is actually spent listening? That includes everything from listening to the birds and the music on the radio to listening to instructions from your boss or for directions or things like that. So we need to learn how to be really good active listeners. The problem is many of us fall into poor listening practices. There are a lot of them out there, but I'm going to share with you a few that I feel are the easiest to become habits. The first is interrupting. We all know people who interrupt every time we are in conversation. And again, it becomes habit. Sometimes people are so anxious just to share their 2 cents, or they're very passionate about a topic or a subject. But the problem is when it happens mindlessly again and again, people really start to lose our respect, and they think we're not valuing what they have to say, and just comes off as rude. So we really need to try interrupting whenever possible. The second is distorted listening. Now, this happens when we just get information wrong. We hear what we want to hear. That's the selective hearing thing. Or we insert messages that really weren't there altogether. So if we kind of change what we hear to suit our needs, that is a poor listening practice. Another one is eavesdropping. Whether you're doing it intentionally or unintentionally, when you listen to something that wasn't meant for you, it is a violation of privacy, and it can help, or it can cause people to lose respect for you as well. The fourth one is narcissistic listening. Narcissism is, of course, focus on self. So somebody tells a story about, something terrible that happened, and you one up that. Your story was even worse. Or, on the opposite, somebody got something good happened in their lives, and you say, oh, well, here's what happened to me today. And so when we turn those around, again, sometimes we're trying to just empathize with them, or make ourselves feel like, oh, we're similar. But when we send it back to ourselves, it takes away from the value of what they are saying. And the last one is called pseudo listening. It's basically fake listening. We do it all the time. We nod, we smile, we act like we're listening, but we have no idea what was just said. I know I can fall into that habit sometimes. If I have a lot going on in my life, and I'm thinking through things, or maybe the topic doesn't interest me, I again go through the motions, and then that can come back to hurt you when somebody asks a question and you realize you're caught in the moment and don't have an answer. So we should avoid those poor listening practices, and we should become more deep, mindful listeners. So there are lots of different processes or different techniques for mindful listening, but one that I like to teach my students is called the HEAR method. And it's a nice acronym, easy to remember, because the whole point of it is just that we are really hearing what is said. So the H is for halt. Just halt whatever you're doing and give people your full attention. It's that simple. Get off of your phone, stop doing the dishes, whatever you're doing, and just listen. The E is for enjoy. Take a deep breath and really try to experience joy in listening to what that other person has to say. Then the A is ask. Ask questions. Ask for clarification for things that you're not sure if you understand correctly, or you just want to be sure you're getting properly. And finally, the R is reflect. You can reflect to yourself on what they were saying or how they're feeling, or you can reply. You can reflect with a reply and say something in return. So again, the HEAR method is a really nice mindful listening practice. So let's stop and put it into practice again. I want you to think about the last conversation you had with somebody. And I want you to replay that in your mind with the HEAR method. How would that conversation have gone if you had halted, just enjoyed what they were saying, asked questions for clarification, and reflected? Think about trying to put that practice into play next time you're in conversation with somebody. So, moving from listening, we need to talk about talking. And this is another skill. Just like being a good listener is really important, being a good talker is crucial to our communication interactions. And it's talking the right amount. It takes some risks, it takes some courage, but it really helps us to develop secure relationships. So self-disclosure is the act of verbally or non-verbally revealing things, truthful things about yourself to others. And it's a skill to learn. It's something you have to really reflect on. For some of us, it is easy and we self-disclose openly. For others, it's really hard and it takes a lot of skill. But there are a few things to think about when you're self-disclosing. When you are ready to self-disclose, you need to be willing to discuss a wide range of topics. You need to be able to go deep enough and, really get into the thick and thin of things. And you need it to be two-way. So you need to be willing to share things about yourself, just like the people with whom you talk need to be willing to share things back to you. For some people, it takes time. So if both parties aren't ready, maybe you just take baby steps towards self-disclosing. But research shows that the more we're willing to self-disclose, the healthier our relationships tend to be. So let's stop and put this into practice. I want you to think about a friendship you have developed recently, maybe within the last 6 months or so. Do you think you've done a fair enough job sharing things about yourself with them? Do you think you've maybe shared too much too quickly? Has this person shared with you? And I just want you to think about maybe how that can be adjusted moving forward. Or even, would it be possible for you to have the conversation about, hey, I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about maybe our pasts or our families or our hopes for the future. So think about self-disclosure in your life and how that might make a difference in your world. The next part is about knowing yourself. Before you can self-disclose things about yourself, you have to know who you are a little bit. So self-awareness is just that knowledge of who we are, how we think, what makes us tick, how we express ourselves. And again, it takes a little bit of time. I know the world tends to tell us that it's not okay to think about ourselves. We have to put others before ourselves. But just like on an airplane, if you don't take care of yourself first, you're not going to be good for other people. So we have to understand ourselves and do some thinking about who we are. One model to consider is something called the Johari window. This goes all the way back to 1955. It's a model created by two psychologists. They lumped their names together, Joseph Luft and Harry Ingram. So the Johari window. And really what it is it's four quadrants, and it demonstrates your willingness to share certain things about yourself, and it also considers things that other people see in you that you might not really be aware of. So there are four quadrants. The first one is called the open quadrant. It is things that we know about ourselves and things that others know about us. So those would be things like, I have brown hair, I am tall or short. Obvious things, a lot of physical things like that. The second quadrant is the blind quadrant. So these are things that we don't really know, but others do. So think about what you might be blind to about yourselves. Sometimes people don't realize that they are fast talkers. I've been told that a time or two. Or they don't realize they interrupt a lot. So those are things in the blind quadrant. The third quadrant is the hidden quadrant. Those are things that we know about ourselves, but we don't share with others. So that can be different for everybody. For some people, it can be things like what they're really scared of, or their most exciting dreams that they just don't want to, they feel silly sharing with other people. Again, for other people, there's very little in that hidden quadrant. They share everything like an open book. That fourth quadrant is the unknown quadrant. These are things that self and others, nobody knows. So things like what the future will hold, maybe who you will end up married to, where you will end up living in the future, things like that. So I want you to put this into practice again. I want you to think about especially that hidden, the second, the blind, and the third, the hidden quadrants. I want you to think about things that you might not be aware of in your own lives or in your own life, in your day-to-day interactions with people, in your personality quirks, things like that. And then I want you to think about your willingness to share some things in that hidden quadrant. And think about whether one or both of those should be resized or shifted to make your relationship stronger. So thinking about that Johari window, again, really helps with our self-awareness. The next part of knowing oneself is emotional intelligence. You all know what intelligence is. It's great to be intelligent, but there's another kind of intelligence called emotional intelligence, sometimes referred to as EQ, that people are realizing might be even more important than the standard traditional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is an awareness of who we are and an ability to use our emotional skills and our interactive qualities in ways that are beneficial. So employers are really becoming very passionate about finding people whose EQ is really high. And it's something, again, that can be learned. Everybody can become emotionally intelligent. One of the ways to do this is to use a practice called mindfulness. Mindfulness, if you've heard of it, it's kind of become a buzzword out there, and a lot of people call it a lot of different things. I actually did a lot of research on mindfulness for my master's in communication, and mindfulness really is about, there's a few components. First of all, it is that self-awareness, and it's also about being non-reactive and non-judgmental and empathetic. So when you're mindful, again, you refrain from making snap judgments. You refrain from acting right away. Instead, you just process. You don't make assumptions. You think through. You let the people finish. You notice everything around you, including how you are feeling and how you are thinking. So there are a lot of mindful practices that you can put into play. One of them is called Notice, Shift, Rewire. 3 easy steps. So when you notice, you simply notice the here and now. Okay, what is happening here and now? How do I feel? What am I thinking? How fast is my heart racing? What am I hearing around me? What's going on in my brain? That's the notice. And then the shift is a quick shift back to non-judgmental awareness. So I'm not going to say, oh, you're being so dramatic or you're so anxious again. Okay, you're going to stop labeling and you're just going to see what happens when you observe. You're going to shift to just an awareness. And finally is rewire. You're going to rewire the way you typically respond to these situations, and you're going to simply stay with whatever is happening, let it be in the moment. So I love to put mindfulness into practice when I'm doing many things. I will take mindful walks where I focus on each of my 5 senses one at a time. I will do mindful driving where I turn off the radio, roll up the windows, and I just listen to what's going on in my body. I listen to the sounds around me. I just observe everything without judging it. You can even do it for things that are not so desirable, like household chores, washing the dishes, or vacuuming, or whatever it happens to be. So we're going to stop, and I'm going to have you think about an action that is a regular part of your life. Maybe something that you find, again, undesirable, a chore that you have all the time, or something that you tend to dread. And I want you to try to imagine what that process is like. I want you to think about all of the 5 senses and how it feels without you judging and labeling. What are your hands feeling? What are your eyes seeing? What are your ears experiencing? What feelings do you feel on your skin and your body? What does the ground feel like beneath your feet? You can put these mindfulness practices, especially the halt, shift, rewire practice, into play. You can find that you really start to understand yourself and reset your patterns so you can be more in control of who you are. The final part of understanding ourselves is naming our emotions. How many emotions do you think exist in the English language? Do you know that researchers say there are over 34,000 feelings that have been defined? So that's a lot. There's a word called alexithymia, and I really am fascinated by this word. The idea of alexithymia is the inability to name what we're feeling. And I say with 34,000 words, it's no wonder. That's a lot of things we can be feeling. But it is really helpful, especially when we're dealing with difficult conversations or conflict management, to be able to say what you're feeling. So again, back in the 1950s, no, it was actually over 100 years ago, a gentleman by the name of William James created what is called the feelings or the emotions wheel. And it's been done many times over. In my workbook that I've shared with everybody, there's a variation of it. And it's really interesting because at the very core of this wheel are what they consider the 6 primary emotions in the human language anyway. These are sadness, anger, fear, love, joy, and surprise. So William James said that everything we feel comes down to those 6 basic human emotions. And then there are just lots of variations of each one. So why is it important to think about this? Well, sometimes you might be acting irritable, or you might be, trying to keep away from others, and you don't even know why, or you don't know how to explain it. But when you look at that emotions wheel, it all goes back to fear. There's something in your life that you're afraid of. So if we can use this wheel to be able to, again, talk about what we're feeling, the different shades of what we're feeling, or if we can be more empathetic toward people when they're expressing different behaviors and different feelings, knowing that it's probably something different really going on at the core, helps us to be, again, more empathic and better fit to enjoy each other's relationships. So it's really important to be able to name your emotions. And a final part to knowing yourself is to recognizing our own implicit bias. I know some of you are thinking, what? I have no biases at all. It's really interesting and eye-opening to think about the bias. It comes from a lot of different places. We tend to make friends with and be in relationships with people who think like us and who grew up where we did and value the same things as we did. And that's wonderful and it makes sense. But sometimes what happens is we just start to fall into these habits where we think, that is the only way to be, that is the only way to think, this is right, and, people who don't think like this or don't act that way are wrong. And that is where implicit bias comes from. We just get stuck in our thinking, in our actions as well. And so we have this flawed reality, this flawed perception of reality. So sometimes these reinforced implicit biases can lend themselves to becoming what's called microaggressions. And these are little tiny everyday things that we do to suggest that other people are different or that other people's way of doing things is wrong. And again, it's usually unintentional and things that we're not even aware of, but they happen all the time. The examples I provide in my workbook consider such things as you maybe have a foreign exchange student who starts at your job, and you just tell them, oh my goodness, your English is so good. You speak great English, and you might not know that they've spoken English as a primary language their whole lives. Or you might have a female construction worker and tell her she's so brave and she's so strong, and what led you to think of construction, because it just assumes that that's not the norm and that there's something different about her. Or you have somebody that in the neighborhood maybe who is blind, and you ask them always if they need help with something when they might not always be looking for help. So little tiny ways that we suggest that there are differences become these microaggressions, and again, they can damage relationships. So in order to deal with your own implicit biases, there are a couple steps you can take. The first one is just to be honest with yourself. It can be uncomfortable to really do some soul searching and think about, do I use unfair labels toward different people? Do I make assumptions about how people from this community act or how people from this particular religion look? So you just have to have that reality check and that self-awareness. And next, it can be important to get to know people from a wide variety of communities and circles. So I want you to think about your own circle and how many people, look different from you or act different from you, go to different churches or different faith groups, or have come from different places in the world. And I really do encourage you to try to get to know people outside of your traditional groups and communities. And then once you become aware of your potential biases, I want you to refrain from unfair thinking or words and actions that are just based on assumptions. It's always important to avoid what is called polarizations, where you just label people in one of two camps. All Democrats are this way and Republicans are that way. All Christians are this way and non-Christians are that way. All men act like this and women act like this. And the final thing to do is just to apologize. If you recognize that you just used a microaggression, or if you realize you've been unfairly assuming things about a person or a group, then it's okay to just apologize and tell them that you're working on it and you're trying and you hadn't realized before that you may have been hurtful in the way you acted or sounded. So it's difficult, but I want you to really think about your own implicit biases. So now that we've thought a little bit about ourselves and our self-awareness and our willingness to share, we're going to just get to some of the conflict basics. When I say conflict, I know there are many of you out there who would do anything to just steer clear of any kind of disagreement. I know myself, I'm not a fan of disagreements or people, arguing, so it's difficult. But again, avoiding conflict can have a lot of negative outcomes. It can cause unhealthy relationships. It can cause resentment, frustration, because those feelings aren't going anywhere. They're not getting resolved, and eventually it can lead to having some contempt. So believe it or not, dealing with conflict is actually beneficial. First of all, it can help people find common ground. You might feel like you are on this page, I'm on this page, but you start talking more and you realize, okay, well, we both have this in common, or we've both experienced this in the past. So you can find that common ground and work with it. It also helps people learn how to manage future conflicts. So the more you're willing to engage in conflict in a healthy way, the more likely you are to do it well. It provides an opportunity to learn about the other person, learn about yourself, learn about the world around you. It can lead to creative solutions. The more you're able to really spend some time managing conflicts and having tricky conversations, the more likely you are to come up with some ideas that you would have never come up with on your own, perhaps. You will definitely grow in your relationship and build trust and in one another, for sure. And you become more assertive, less aggressive. Just basically, you become a better human when you're able to manage conflicts in a peaceful and productive manner. Couple other things to keep in mind is that conflict is viewed different from everybody. Again, some people, fear conflict completely. A lot of times it's because they just believe that all conflict is just a disruption in the normal flow of life. And so it should be avoided because they just want things smooth. Other people don't even label conflict as good or bad. They believe it is normal. And so we've got those different variations of what people think about conflict. We also have some people who have what is called high tolerance for conflict, where they don't mind. They will go in and they're willing to duke it out. They kind of get some joy off of bouncing ideas back and forth off of one another. And then you have people who have low tolerance for conflict, and those are the people who try to avoid it at all expenses. So these are really important things to look at. A final point is that conflict just looks different for everybody. You might perceive that there's a conflict out there, and the next person might think, oh, I didn't even think that was an issue, or that was nothing, that's no big deal at all. So what you perceive as conflict might not even be considered a conflict by the other people in your lives.